All right, now we welcome in our good friend Jared Book from Habs Eyes on the Prize.com and on his social media. Folks, I encouraged you last time that Jared was on the show to follow him on all the socials, X and Blue Sky as well. We're all gathering. He just has some really interesting takes and thoughts that I was going to tell you. Guess what, Jared? Guess what I really like about you
What? I'm,
is that
I'm a little scared, but
I
what?
know. It's that we don't always agree. In fact, I would say we're usually like in the same sphere, but I'm usually a little different than, we're just close enough that we can have a discussion like this. That's what I really enjoy that um, I feel the same, but and so aren't those the best discussions? And maybe that's because we have this built-in Montreal Toronto rivalry. I don't know. But I mean, I always appreciate your opinions and insight, and the facts are always right on. And so, if you're looking, especially for the Canadian team's perspective on things, Jared is the guy to follow. So, welcome on in. Happy New Year. Glad to have you back on.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Welcome. So we want to get your takes, and here's where I kind of got that thought about how we agree mostly. The biggest news, of course, that's still reverberating in the PWHL news world is the Blockbuster trade between Ottawa and Toronto. So why don't you go ahead and give us your thoughts from any angle that you want. You're a little bit neutral, which is nice. So what did you think of that stunner?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the trade broke while Corey Chevry was talking after the Montreal Boston game on Monday. So everybody kind of gets their phone back, and I get a lot of messages on my phone. I'm like, what just happened? And one of them was like, what just happened with Ottawa and Toronto? I'm like, I don't know. What happened with Ottawa and Toronto? So I checked my phone and saw the trade, and my first instinct was, what is Ottawa doing? To be quite honest. And then as I thought about it a little bit more, I think that it made a lot of sense for both teams. I think both teams got exactly what they wanted in the trade, and I said it on social media as well. Is like when you look at it, I think Toronto got the more talented players in the trade in terms of Savannah Harmon and Hayley Scamurra. But the issue was in Ottawa, they were not scoring. They at the time of the trade, they both had no points. So there's definitely a need for a better fit in Ottawa, and I think that Jocelyne Larocque is going to come in and do that. There's been a lot of one goal losses in Ottawa over the last two seasons. Jocelyne Larocque is a person who can maybe turn those into wins or at least into overtime games, and get you there and help them on that side. And Victoria Bach, I think, was underutilized in Toronto. Quite honestly, I think that she's not built for a fourth line energy role. She's a scorer. She's an offensive player, and I think she'll have an opportunity to provide more offense in Ottawa. And it's a team that kind of needs more offense. There's a lot of very responsible players in Ottawa, especially in that forward group. And I think that they needed a little bit less Hayley Scamurra, a little bit more Victoria Bach. And I think you could argue that Toronto maybe needed the opposite, where they have a lot of offensive players and maybe needed somebody to kind of be their Emily Clark next to Blair Turnbull, like we see on the national team. And ironically, Emily Clark is an Ottawa player, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that yeah, I'm intrigued by it. I think it's a huge trade that made shockwaves throughout the league. I was at Montreal practice before they went to Seattle, and players were like, "Did you see that trade?" So it's something that reverberated throughout the league, and I think it's a really, it's obviously there's the personal aspect that's a little bit maybe unfortunate, but I think that's what gets people talking is big
Mm-hmm.
trades, and as one player told me, um, in Montreal, that's what they asked for. Yeah, they asked to be professional. They asked to have a professional league. That's what comes with it, and I
Yeah.
think that it's going to be a very interesting to see which direction both teams take from that trade. Obviously, the first game went in Ottawa's favor. In a game, Toronto, had did pretty much everything they could, but score and win that game. But it'll be very interesting to see where they go from here. Will they both make the playoffs? Will only one make the playoffs? That'll be very interesting and change probably how we look at this trade.
Yeah, that's about where I've landed. I think everybody at first kind of looked at, just I don't know, talent or skill or whatever without kind of weighing in all of the other ripple effects, as you just said and rightly pointed out with Larocque. And the part I want to make sure is noted in case, like you said, one makes the playoffs and one doesn't or anything like that, is there's the addition on both sides of what they needed, but there's a subtraction on the Toronto side of what was and kept being repeated over and over, a really, really important dressing room and chemistry leader and person. And as you said, the human side of this was just pretty heartbreaking to be honest. Not that everybody couldn't also just see, well, this is a hockey trade and this makes a lot of sense, but it was hard to see the emotions on obviously Larocque being the number one,
Yeah.
person who had a lot of attachment to Troy Ryan and to Gina Kingsbury. And Coach Ryan even said for Gina, it was probably harder than any decision she's made. Just she goes back even further than Troy does. They have just a long, long history. So, those are the parts, as you said, they asked for that, but they also don't have the experience from even juniors or anything where once in a while you lose a friend in the middle of a season and just have that sort of shock. So this is the one I think that, as you said, tips it like this is a professional league. The GMs are making hockey decisions. And I think you're bang on about the ingredients. It's interesting that they did put Hayley Scamurra on the wing with Blair Turnbull and Emma Malte right away to give that sandpaper factor. Uh, do you know just a little bit more about? I mean, Scamurra and Bach are probably slightly lesser known. I mean, let's give Savannah Harmon her due. She played with Renata, and I think that had a large factor. But any other details on any of the four really that we might be overlooking that help us weigh this trade?
Yeah, I think, I kind of mentioned a little bit, but I think Victoria Bach has this offensive potential that, looking at her points totals doesn't tell you the whole story of that trade. And I think that that's something that is going to be really interesting. Obviously, in the first game, I think she played with Gabby Hughes and Danielle Serdachny. Obviously, that's a line that's going to get offensive opportunities that she might have not gotten in Toronto. So I think that it maybe plays to her strengths a little bit. Um, and I think that's maybe something to look at because all Victoria Bach has done, her entire hockey career is score goals where she's played. I mean, you look at the NCAA where she beat Marie-Philippe Poulin and Sarah LaFour's records at Boston University. That's no small feat for a player. Very similar in a way to Darryl Watts's NCAA career, where all Darryl Watts did was score as well, but never really played her way into the national team picture. Maybe that's part of the issue is that it's the same staff in Toronto as was with Hockey Canada. I'm not saying that they don't like her. Obviously, they did. They drafted her. They brought her in to Toronto organization, but maybe not utilizing her to her strengths as much as outsiders would necessarily. So yeah, I think that's something to look at. Hayley Scamurra again is a player who can score. She scored the first goal in Ottawa history. I was at that game. They were playing Montreal. Really strong shot, and again, a player that you look at Ottawa through the last two seasons, and you see a lot of players are like, why aren't they scoring more? And I think she fits into that, and I think maybe even a player like Brianne Jenner is not scoring maybe as much as you would expect her to. Gabby Hughes and all that group is why are they not scoring as much as they should? And maybe adding someone like Victoria Bach is someone that can get unlock a little bit more of that offense. And Scamurra is going to have a chance in Toronto like I said, kind of have that role where she's not really expected to score, but can bring offense with her. She's not playing with a player like Hannah Miller or Sarah Nurse, or probably not Natalie Spooner when she gets back either. So it's gonna allow her to kind of provide a little bit more offense in kind of a role that you see, um, you know, players taking the national team, like a Kristen O'Neill or Blair Turnbull on the
Yeah.
national team. They kind of play that shutdown role, but they can score big goals for you. And she's a player that can do that. And on the power play as well, if you put her at the circle, she can fire some shots as well as at the goalie. So, yeah, I think that a lot of people, rightfully so, are looking at the defense aspect of this trade. Those are where the bigger names are for both teams. But I think that the secret will be the fit offensively for those two players. And yeah, I can't help but think that there's a little bit more Victoria Bach offense to come that maybe wasn't available in Toronto playing where she was on that fourth line.
Yeah, yeah, that's an important point. And you wonder, it's interesting when you name all the names of players who aren't scoring as much. I think every team, we only go from what we know in the past, and a lot of it's international play and things like that. But the goalies are just so darn good that, it is frustrating when you look, towards the end of the year, a certain player only has like 4 or 5 goals, and you're like, wow, like there are goals, like maybe a Daryl Watts or somebody that
Yeah.
you're just sort of like, but the opportunities just aren't there every game. So you know, what do we think about that just before we
Yeah.
touch on the next topic? I mean, why is it so hard, and why is it so frustrating? Like a game like we just saw between Toronto and Ottawa that was ended up 2-1 with so much offense and so little goal scoring.
Yeah, I think that's really what differentiates players who are scoring in this league and players who aren't. No, it's not a talent factor. One thing I noticed, Montreal was a pretty good example of that. It's just, they weren't scoring goals other than, the top players last year, and when they weren't scoring as much, there was not really much going on. But you look at a player like Abby Barine, and she just puts herself in positions to make differences. She's not afraid to go to net. And I'm not saying other players are necessarily, but I think it's just if you're always looking for the perfect shot. These goalies are too good, and if if you shoot a little bit lower than you want, or a little bit, you might miss the net completely, or you might
Yeah,
hit them in the chest. So it's a tough league to score goals, but I think that it's not really a talent factor, and I think you see around the league scoring has kind of, I think, gone up a little bit. And yes, part of that is the power play changes, the rules to the penalty kill and no escape. But I think a lot of it is just the talent has, raised the bar a little bit. And you have fourth liners across the league who can beat you with a shot, and that wasn't necessarily the case last year. So um, it's going to be interesting for sure. But you look at a player like Alina Mueller, who's still looking for her first point of the season. Alina Mueller is a talented player. It's just finding the right opportunity, and even getting a little bit lucky as
yeah,
well, right? I think it's a short season, so bounces don't always even out the way that you think they
yeah.
should either. And I think you definitely saw that in the playoffs a little bit, where especially in the Montreal Boston series, where that was much closer than a sweep. But Montreal just couldn't get the bounce they needed, and Boston capitalized on their chances. And I think that's what kind of what you see on a wide scale in the league this year is just it's you get games where, like the New York game, where it's like 4-0 and 5-0. I think that game ended actually, and then you get games where it's 3-2 or 2-1, or
Mhm.
and coming down to overtime or the last minute, and I think that it's Emirates Mashmeyer is a really good goalie, and she might only allow one goal in a game, and then and that's tough to be the other team. Yeah, it's a mix of both, but I think the talent level is rising in this league, and eventually it's going to even out, down the road. But yeah, there's a lot of good goaltending in this league, and a lot of good scorers too. So it's going to be a give and take, and a lot of smart coaches that know how to
Mhm.
shut down
Mhm.
offenses.
Yeah.
We shouldn't discount that either.
Yeah, it's true. They're it's it's frustrating when you're on the other end of the 2-1 game, but when your goalie is standing on her head, it's so fascinating to watch. And a couple of the games, Aaron Frankel, I think, has done this as well as Mashmeyer. Those are probably the two mainly that we're seeing where you can almost see them getting in the heads of the other team's players because they are shooting wide or they're making an extra pass. And then when it does go to the net, they're kind of just jamming at it, like, just please come on. There's nothing in between. It's either like, all these hope plays or, trying to be too fancy and then just being like, oh, just please, just sneak one in over the line, sort of. But it's been fascinating. And I do think if we were to compare this to an NHL season with 82 games, as you said, those bounces might even out and some players' numbers would sort of ebb and flow. And we don't really get that in the PWHL because we've only had one season to gauge it by, but even you can kind of see even the, 7 games or so that these teams have played, certain trends are happening for sure. Some players are quieter than others, but it's also, like a quarter of the season already. So it's like, geez, it goes by quickly. So let's turn our attention since we're getting things from, I'm really, really curious what is going on at the Montreal end of things with the Takeover tour, which we just saw last night start off in Seattle. Why don't you just tell us what some of the storylines were there? Montreal is taking part in these first three West Coast games.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting opportunity because so much of this league is, you go, on the road for one game and then maybe two at most, and then you kind of go back home in between. There's enough time between games and the cities are close enough together that you can kind of do that some of the time. Other times it's not possible. But for Montreal, they're kind of going on, a 10-day trip of, 3 games in 3 different cities. And it's kind of funny because they're the road team in these 3 games, but between Seattle on Sunday and Vancouver on Wednesday, they're going to be waiting for Toronto in the Pacific Northwest. And even though they're a road team, they're going to be maybe a little bit more used to the time
Mhm.
change. And I know Toronto's going out there a couple days early as well for practices and stuff like that. But it's kind of a interesting. It's a unique opportunity because like I said, usually Montreal was on the road for a couple of games, but they come back in between. There's the Christmas break as well um, for them, and now they kind of have a road trip where they're kind of out there. They have the Denver game as well, and they kind of just have the opportunity to be together as a team and focus on hockey. And I think that's going to be really interesting for them. It's not like they're getting a home game necessarily taken away on this trip, and they can kind of just enjoy it instead of making a trip to Boston or to Toronto or Minnesota. They kind of get to be a part of this tour for the first part, and then they're going to host the game in Quebec City as well, and then the other teams kind of take over the takeover tour afterwards.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's definitely Montreal heavy early
Yeah.
on, and
So the first game in the books, and it was interesting coming on the heels of that, kind of chippy game that Montreal and Boston just played. This one had a lot of the same ingredients as it went along, but it was a bit of a roller coaster for both teams. So, what did you think of that outcome? The 3-2 and 4-3 have just got to be the most common scores in this league. It's crazy, but yeah, Boston needed those points pretty desperately. You could see that.
yeah, for sure. And honestly, I was at Monday's game in Montreal, and that was really chippy. You can tell these two teams have that rivalry, definitely. But they were well behaved in
Pretty
front of
much.
yeah, more or less in front of Seattle. But yeah, a big win for Boston. They needed the points. They had come back against Minnesota to force overtime, and then get the win in that one. But in this league, forcing overtime is sometimes just as important as not losing in
Mm-hmm.
regulation, because not only do you get a point yourself, you take a point away from the other team, even if you lose. So definitely a lot of things that that you can see. Boston's power play was 0 for 5 on Monday against Montreal, but both their goals in regulation time came on the power play
Yeah.
against Montreal on Sunday night in Seattle. And so definitely um, a point that they wanted to improve, and they did. And Montreal kind of has to look at this and be like, what went wrong. Corey Chevrier said after the game that penalties and discipline wasn't really an issue for them before that game, but it was in that game. So maybe that's something that they're going to look at ahead of Wednesday when they face Toronto in Vancouver. The game in Vancouver is going to have probably close to 19,000 fans as well. It's sold out, and uh, it's going to be a pretty fun atmosphere, I think, because it's going to be pretty mixed. Montreal
Hmm.
Toronto fans in that game as well.
That's true. And to look at that one coming up, we know that they have played once already, and Montreal got the overtime win after last season. They hadn't had success against Toronto at all. So certainly Montreal will be looking for some redemption after that game, to get the 3 points they probably felt they deserved. But Toronto is almost now in the position they are in the bottom of the league. So they're going to look like a hungry team pretty much that you just saw in Boston as well. So that sets up nicely for that to be a pretty important, meaningful contest for those two.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Toronto, it's a good opportunity for them to have a road trip with their new team. Kind of have like take a breath after that, one day after a few hours even after the trade, they were pretty much playing against their former teammates. And this kind of gives them an opportunity to be like, okay, this is our group going forward, and have an opportunity to go on the road. And have that experience in Vancouver will be interesting for them. And yeah, I mean, the thing is that there's no easy game in this league for any team. But if you want to be a team that's battling for first, like Montreal is, you have to beat the teams that are at the bottom of the standings, like Toronto is, and there is kind of that pressure to perform in those games, because if you're not picking up those points, guess what? Minnesota is going to be picking up those points, or New York is, and before you know it, Ottawa can be up there with a couple of wins, and so it's still very close, and but the points that you get in January are just as important when you get to April and May. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when those points might matter a little bit more. Look at Minnesota, right? I mean, the points that they accumulated early on in the season allowed them to overcome that 5 game losing streak, heading into after Worlds. Sorry, going into the playoffs, and look what they did, right? So, you definitely they can't take the points away from you. And Toronto is kind of in a similar spot to where they were last year too, and you wonder if they can do it again. Obviously, it's not a position they want to be in every year, and you wonder whether everyone kind of expected them to turn it around, and I think that they're not as bad as what they've shown so far this season.
Mm-hmm.
But can they do it again? And a lot of that's going to come with goaltending. And they went to Reagan Kirk for a bit in Toronto, and I would expect we see Kristen
Yes.
Campbell back in the net soon, and can she go on that run that she did last year, and basically took the team from last place and brought them to first place, and she won goalie of the year because of it. It'll be interesting to see what will happen, and basically, no one knows how this new Toronto team is going to look without Jocelyne Larocque. We saw in one game. It was a pretty offensive game for them. They allowed the late goal, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. And Vancouver is going to be a good atmosphere for that to happen. And another big rink for Montreal and Toronto. They've done it a couple of times
Yeah.
in
Did they ever
Scotiabank, and
have they played twice yet? I know that was kind of a joke, but I honestly don't have. I don't think they
I don't think
have.
they've played. Yeah,
That was
no,
their
because
first game at
the
Coca-Cola, and now they're going to another neutral site. And so, whenever their next meetup is going to be at one of their home rinks, what might be the first time they've actually ever played twice, which is crazy. So,
yeah, it's crazy to think about. But yeah, I think even their first game in Montreal is in Laval, and I don't think they played in Laval yet either. So
jeez.
at Place Bell, because the two games here were in Verdun and at the Bell Center, One of the home games was in Pittsburgh, that Montreal had. So yeah, I think that that streak might continue. I don't know if they have a road game.
Wow.
I don't think so because I think Montreal's at home the next couple of while. So yeah, that streak will continue somehow. So it's kind of a weird quirk in the
It
schedule, but
is.
it will continue for at least one more game for sure.
Yeah,
Two
not
more games if you count
yeah,
if you
whatever
count
the
Wednesdays,
next
obviously. Yeah.
yeah, finally they might. I mean, not I'm sure they're not really paying attention, but it is just an interesting
No, no.
quirk that,
Yeah.
since they are kind of marquee names and players that they've been to these neutral site games and so on. And so we've got a couple of Vancouver natives on both sides. I think I know Jen Gardner was super excited to get back, and I mean, imagine turning pro and then getting a game in your hometown so quickly. Like I'm sure the smile, you just can't wipe the smile off her face. And Rylan McKinnon, who, somebody asked her, like, how much is this? And she was like, I just came from youth sports where we played in front of, maybe a few hundred or, and now this, and now to like jump into something this big. She went to UBC, of course, and is from that area. And Hannah Miller is from just north of the city. When I spoke to her at practice the other day, she has a large contingent, like between 50 and 100 tickets that she bought or set aside for some, extended family and cousins and so on. So I wonder if, those cheering sections might be visible, like everybody with their one color jerseys on. I think that's going to be just a super exciting atmosphere. And it will be, from what I was told, Kristen Campbell back in goal. And um, that to me, that's going to be the biggest factor right now until Spooner gets back and they can sort of stabilize everything. They need that goaltending so that those last second goals aren't costing them the 3 points. I mean, that was just unfortunate, all the way around that Reagan Kirk was playing really well and still is. And, yeah, like you said, those 3 points that go on the bank are just, it's hard to let those go. So I don't know. I'm always a fan of overtime. Like maybe we roll our eyes a little bit, but then the points get spread out a little bit. And I like to keep things close. I don't know if you see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because the last 5 minutes of games in the third period mean so much more because you can have that swing. Yeah, I definitely think that it's a mindset that the teams have in trying to get that, maybe, getting that empty net goal, getting that insurance goal,
Yeah.
and also trying to tie the game and win in regulation or at least force overtime. So yeah, it's definitely something that happens. And you mentioned the local players in Vancouver, and it's kind of funny because I during the preseason camp when the game in Edmonton was announced. Ottawa was in Montreal, and there's Danielle Sardachny, who's in her first year, gets a hometown game from Edmonton in her first year, and then you have someone like Emma Smashmar, who's been playing pro forever, and finally gets a game in her first her first game. She's just outside of Edmonton, and she gets a home game for her, and then someone like Sardachny gets it right away. Same thing with Montreal and Toronto of Hannah Miller, who's been playing pro all over the world, China and lots of places, and then gets a game in BC, and then you have someone like McKinnon or Gardner who come into the league and get a game right away,
Just,
and
oh,
it's
this must happen all the time. But
yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So it's a fun little wrinkle to add to that as well. But yeah, it's cool for these markets to see it, and it's cool for these players to be able to have people who haven't watched them play in a long time
yeah.
close to home.
Maybe with that, I'll just ask you a final thought about these West Coast cities. We'll come full circle because we might have a slightly different opinion, although I don't really have a strong opinion. But could you see, maybe not with this round of expansion, but in the next round where they do something like a Western division where they could somehow adjust play and travel so those cities like Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Seattle could get teams?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, I don't think necessarily this round, just because it spreads it out a little bit too much. But if this round of expansion you get maybe say I'm not I don't have any inside knowledge just to
Hot take.
preface that, but I mean if you get a market like say St. Louis or Detroit or Chicago, and kind of move the center of the league a little bit more towards the west, then it makes it easier to go farther west. But yeah, I mean, obviously, any teams that are added this round of expansion out west, that's a brutal travel schedule for them, because every road game is going to be at least a time zone or two away, or two or three actually. So I definitely think that it's possible down the road. There's it's proven there's a market for it. Seattle had over 12,000 fans. Vancouver sold out. Edmonton sold out. There's definitely a market for it.
Mhm.
But I think that realistically, and just in terms of like fairness and logistics, it's probably around away. But I think definitely there's a market for women's hockey and the PWHL out west, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would think, there are so many things that go into it, including, just arenas and all the local
Hmm.
considerations.
Yeah.
But if they went to say 8 teams or even 10 teams, well, at that point they might be going to 10. If they could do some kind of an unbalanced schedule where the Western teams played each other one extra time, or, save a trip and things like that, might make that work out. But yeah, it's hard with, no offense to Winnipeg or any of those cities in the middle. There's just
Mhm.
not much, to make it kind of workable where right now where the teams could go a little bit further and a little bit further. It's really a trek when they go out there. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the record ends up being after this West Coast part of the takeover tour, and good on them for providing such an exciting game. I think the first stop was a full success all the way around. So we're going to look forward to round two. Jared and I will have a side bet on the game because we cheer for different teams mostly. Although, like in the YouTube chat where it says I just want both teams to have fun. That's usually what I select. I always like players on both sides, and so. But with that, we'll let you go. I appreciate all your insight, and especially from the Montreal side of things. So again, you can find Jared at habseyesontheprize.com and follow on social media for a lot of, hockey takes, and can people send you questions on social media, Jared? Are you up for that? Like
Yeah, absolutely.
you like to throw that in?
I never turn a chance to talk women's hockey down.
Good.
As long as there's certain people online that do not want to engage politely when talking about women's sports. But if you have genuine questions, I will never turn down an opportunity to chat women's hockey. So yeah, definitely.
Nice, nice. It's always fun to have just a discussion, not necessarily a debate, but where you see things like, well, let's wait and see how some of this plays out. It's just fascinating to watch. So we'll watch for that next stop on Wednesday here, the Takeover Tour. And thanks for joining us, Jared. We really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.